The leader of the BrawlHFY group was called BrawlHFY. He was the tallest one, the widest one, and the one with the most scars, which among the BrawlHFY was the same thing as a resume. He worked for a smuggling cartel that operated in the outer spiral, and he had come to the Concord station for one reason: to collect a debt. The debt belonged to a Valley trader named Silani. Silani was sitting alone at a small table near the bar, her pale blue skin giving off a faint glow in the dim light. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with large, dark eyes and thin fingers that moved gently over a datapad as she reviewed her inventory. She sold rare textiles, beautiful fabrics that changed color in the light, and she was good at her work. She was quiet, polite, and had never hurt anyone in her life. She was not a fighter. She was not brave. She was just a merchant trying to earn a living in a galaxy that did not make it easy. BrawlHFY walked straight to her table. He did not slow down. He did not announce himself. He simply slammed one massive clawed hand down on her datapad, cracking the screen in half. The sound was loud enough to make the nearest tables go silent. "You owe 60,000 credits, BrawlHFY said. His voice was deep, like rocks grinding together. "My employer is tired of waiting." Silani looked up at him. Her skin flickered, the glow fading to a dull gray, which was the Valley expression of fear. She tried to speak calmly. She explained that a shipment of silks had been seized at a border checkpoint by authorities. It was not her fault. The goods were confiscated. She could not pay for something she never received. BrawlHFY did not care about her explanation. He grabbed her by the arm and lifted her off the chair like she weighed nothing. She let out a short, high sound, not quite a scream, but close. Her datapad fell to the floor in 2 pieces. The entire bar went quiet. Every being in the room saw what was happening. The Drenari mercenaries at their long table glanced over, then looked back at their drinks. The Ikari engineers stopped chattering and pressed themselves flat against their platform. The Velnoxi officers observed with blank, unreadable faces. Paco, behind the counter, reached under the bar and put his hand on the plasma shotgun, but he did not pull it out. He had a family. The BrawlHFY were known to retaliate. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped. The galaxy was full of powerful beings, strong species, ancient civilizations, with codes of honor and warrior traditions stretching back thousands of years. And in that moment, every single one of them sat still and let it happen. Except one. Danny Cook set his drink down on the table. He did it slowly, carefully, the way a man does when he knows the next few minutes are going to be unpleasant, and he wants to enjoy the last quiet second before they start. Laura watched him. She knew that look. She had seen it on a frozen moon when he walked into a collapsing building to pull out a trapped worker. She had seen it on a cargo run through pirate space when he steered toward the shooting instead of away from it. It was the look Danny got when something inside him, something stubborn and deeply fundamentally human, decided that the situation was no longer acceptable. "Danny," she whispered, "do not." He stood up anyway. He walked across the bar floor. His boots made no sound on the metal grating. The room was so quiet that the hum of the station's air recyclers was the loudest thing anyone could hear. Every eye in the wet nebula followed him as he crossed the space between his booth and the BrawlHFY. He stopped about 3 feet from BrawlHFY. He had to look up. BrawlHFY was nearly 8 feet tall, with a body that looked like it was built from stone and bad intentions. His clawed hand was still wrapped around Silani's arm. Danny was 6'1" and weighed about 200 pounds, most of it scar tissue and old injuries that ached when it was cold. "Put her down," Danny said. His voice was calm, not loud, not aggressive, just firm, the way a man speaks when he is not making a request. BrawlHFY looked down at him. His black eyes narrowed. "What species are you?" he asked. "Human." Gorath's mouth split open in what passed for a smile among the Krolvek. It was not a pleasant sight. "A human," he said. "The insane ones." His crew behind him laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the walls. Danny did not laugh. He did not smile. He did not move. "Put her down," he said again. "I will not ask a third time." She stumbled backward, gasping, and Laura was already there, catching her by the shoulders and pulling her away from the Krolvek. Laura guided her behind the nearest table and put herself between the Veli and the fight that was about to happen. Gorath squared up to Danny. He rolled his massive shoulders. The bone ridges along his arms scraped together with a grinding sound. He leaned down until his face was close to Danny's, and his breath smelled like engine coolant and something dead. "Walk away, little thing," Gorath said. "Walk away, or I will break every bone in your soft, small body." Danny looked up into those black eyes. Somewhere inside him, adrenaline was already moving, flooding his bloodstream, tightening his muscles, sharpening his vision, turning down the volume on the part of his brain that calculated odds, and turning up the volume on the part that simply refused to quit. "You can try," Danny said. Gorath swung. His fist was enormous, bigger than Danny's head, and it came down in a wide arc that would have cracked concrete. But it was a big swing. A swing built for crushing things that did not move, and Danny was not a thing that stood still. He ducked under the fist, stepped inside Gorath's reach, and drove a hard right hook into the Krolvek's throat. It was not a pretty punch. It was not something they would teach in a fighting academy. But Danny had not learned to fight in an academy. He had learned to fight in alleys, barracks, and cargo holds, and he had learned the only lesson that mattered. Hit the soft parts, hit them hard, and do not stop. Gorath staggered. The throat shot caught him by surprise, and his breath locked up. Danny followed with a knee to the midsection, and then an elbow to the side of the head, right where the bone ridges were thinnest. The bar erupted. The 4 remaining Krolvek charged. They came from different angles, fast for their size, and the floor shook under their weight. Laura kicked the nearest table into the legs of the first one, sending him stumbling, and then she grabbed her sidearm, not to fire it, but to use it as a club, cracking it across his jaw with a sound like a hammer on stone. The Krolvek's head snapped sideways, and he dropped. Danny caught a hit from the second enforcer. A massive fist connected with his ribs, and he felt something crack. The pain was sharp and bright and real, but the adrenaline was stronger. His body registered the damage and then filed it away under "deal with later," which was a very human thing to do. He grabbed a bar stool with both hands and swung it like a bat into the third Krolvek's knee joint. The joint buckled sideways, and the creature went down with a roar. The fourth Krolvek grabbed Danny from behind, wrapping thick arms around his chest, squeezing. Danny felt his cracked ribs scream. He could not breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He snapped his head backward, driving the back of his skull into the Krolvek's face. It hurt Danny almost as much as it hurt the alien, but the grip loosened, and that was enough. He twisted free, spun, and drove his forehead into the Krolvek's nose. The creature staggered back, dark blood running down its face. She had taken down her opponent and moved to cover his flank, her sidearm raised, breathing hard, bruised along her jaw, but steady. The aliens in the bar watched in silence. The Drenari had stopped drinking. The Akari had their small mouths open. The Velnoxi were recording everything on their datapads, their crystalline faces showing something that might have been surprise. Hako finally moved. He pulled the plasma shotgun from under the counter, aimed it at the ceiling, and fired. The blast punched a hole in the overhead panel and showered the room with sparks. The sound was deafening, and every living thing in the bar froze. In the silence that followed, Danny Cook was still standing. Blood ran from a cut above his left eye. He was holding his ribs with one hand and a broken stool leg with the other. His breathing was ragged, his knuckles were split, and he looked like he had been thrown down a flight of stairs. But he was standing. He looked at the remaining KrolVek, the ones still conscious, and spat blood on the floor. "We done?" he asked. They were done. Station security arrived 7 minutes after Paco fired the plasma shotgun through his own ceiling. They came in teams of 4, armored in gray plating, carrying stun rifles, and looking like they had done this before. The KrolVek were pulled off the floor, locked in magnetic restraints, and marched out of the wet nebula one by one. Gorath was the last to leave. He could barely walk, and 2 security officers had to hold him upright. As he passed Danny, he said nothing, but his black eyes stayed locked on the human's face, with the kind of look that promised this was not over. Danny watched him go, then sat down heavily on the nearest chair that was still in one piece. The adrenaline was leaving his body now, and all the pain it had been hiding rushed in at once, like a wave breaking over a wall. His ribs ached deep and sharp. His knuckles were swollen and split. The cut above his eye was bleeding freely, running down the side of his face and dripping off his jaw. Laura crouched beside him. "You are an idiot," she said. "I know," he said. "A complete and total idiot." She pressed a bar napkin against the cut over his eye and held it there. "Come on, medbay." The station's medical bay was clean, white, and staffed by a Veli physician named Talene, who had soft green skin and hands that moved with the gentle precision of someone who had spent decades fixing broken bodies. She scanned Danny with a handheld device and read the results with a look of growing concern. 2 cracked ribs on his left side, a fractured knuckle on his right hand, a deep laceration above his left eye that would need to be sealed, heavy bruising along both forearms and across his back, minor swelling at the base of his skull from the headbutt. Talene looked at Danny, then looked at the scan results, then looked at Danny again. "You should be unconscious," she said. "Any Veli with these injuries would be in shock. Most Velnoxi would have lost consciousness from the pain alone. Even a Drenari would be slowed significantly." Danny was sitting upright on the medical table, his legs dangling over the edge. He shrugged, and then winced, because shrugging moved his ribs. "I have had worse," he said. Talene stared at him. "That is not reassuring." Laura, sitting in a chair nearby with an ice pack pressed to her bruised jaw, said, "He is telling the truth. This is actually one of his better nights out." Talene sealed the cut with a medical laser, wrapped his ribs in a compression band, and injected something into his hand to reduce the swelling in his knuckle. She told him to rest for at least 2 days, to avoid any physical strain, and to absolutely not get into any more fights. Danny thanked her, and immediately asked if the wet nebula was still open. Talene closed her eyes and sighed in a way that suggested she now understood why the Velnoxi called humans insane. Word of the bar fight spread across the Concord station like fire in dry grass. By the time Danny and Laura left the medical bay the next morning, the story had already made its way through every corridor, docking ring, and merchant quarter on the station. The security footage from the wet nebula had been uploaded to the station's internal network, and within a day it had been copied, shared, and sent out on data packets to ships across 3 different star systems. The footage showed something that many species had only read about in academic papers on human behavior. It showed a smaller, weaker, obviously outmatched being walking calmly into a fight it could not win, taking hits that should have ended it, and continuing to fight through what the Velnoxi medical analysts described as a full adrenal cascade, a chemical event in which the human body essentially drugged itself into a temporary state of enhanced strength, reduced pain sensitivity, and narrowed focus. But it was not the fighting that disturbed the galaxy the most. It was what came before the fighting. It was the walking. That moment when Danny Cook stood up from his booth, crossed the silent bar, and placed himself between a KrolVek enforcer and a Veli stranger. He had no obligation to do it. He had no connection to Selani. She was not his species, not his friend, not his client, not his responsibility by any legal or cultural standard in the galaxy. He gained nothing from helping her. He risked everything, and he did it anyway. This was the part that the galaxy could not make sense of. In galactic society, interspecies altruism was extraordinarily rare. Most species would risk themselves only for genetic relatives, political allies, or members of their own kind. The idea that a human would break his own bones to protect a stranger from a completely different species was, to most of the galaxy, somewhere between confusing and terrifying. Counselor Dreth Vaughn of the Velnoxy watched the footage 11 times. He watched it with the careful, measured attention of a scientist studying an experiment that had produced unexpected results. Then he sat in his quarters for a long time and said nothing. 2 days later, he published an amendment to his lecture on human behavior. The original lecture had called humans irrational and emotionally primitive. The amendment did not take those words back, but it added new ones. Humans were irrational, Dreth Vaughn wrote, but their irrationality appeared to be strategically functional. Their bodies produced combat chemicals on demand. Their pain tolerance exceeded every known galactic baseline. And most disturbingly, they seemed to be capable of overriding their own survival instincts, not for personal gain, but for the protection of others. Others they did not even know. Dreth Vaughn ended the amendment with a single sentence that would be quoted across the galaxy for years to come. He wrote that the most dangerous thing about humans was not their strength or their stubbornness, it was their empathy. Because empathy combined with the willingness to suffer was the most unpredictable force in the known universe. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Selani came to visit Danny. She arrived quietly, carrying something wrapped in soft cloth. Her skin was glowing a pale, warm amber, which Danny did not know was the Veli expression of gratitude, so deep it bordered on reverence. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to put on his boots with one hand, because bending over made his ribs feel like they were being pried apart. "You are the human," she said. Danny looked up. "Last time I checked." She stepped closer and held out the wrapped bundle. Inside was a bolt of fabric, the most beautiful thing Danny had ever seen. It shimmered in the light, shifting between deep blue and soft gold, like looking at a sunset through water. It was one of Selani's finest pieces, the kind of textile that sold for thousands of credits to collectors and diplomats. "For you," she said. Danny looked at the fabric, then looked at her. "I cannot take that," he said. "In my culture, a debt must be honored." Danny shook his head carefully, because shaking it too fast made the room spin. "There is no debt. Forget about it." Selani did not understand. In her world, every kindness was a transaction. Every act of protection created an obligation that had to be balanced. The idea that someone would do what Danny had done and then ask for nothing in return did not fit inside any framework she knew. "Why did you do it?" she asked. The question was simple, but her voice carried something heavier: confusion, wonder, and the beginning of something that might have been awe. Danny thought about it. He looked at the ceiling, then at his swollen hand, then at her. "Because somebody had to," he said. Selani stood very still. Her skin shifted from amber to something softer, a warm gold that lit up the room like a candle. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she set the fabric on the bed beside him and said, "Then I will buy you a drink when you are well, and we will be even." Danny smiled. "Deal." She left, and the room was quiet again. Laura, who had been leaning against the wall the entire time pretending to read a maintenance manual, looked at Danny over the top of the pages. "Somebody had to," she repeated. "Shut up." That was almost poetic. "I said shut up." Laura grinned. Then her expression changed. She held up Danny's personal comm unit, which had buzzed while Selani was visiting. there was a message on the screen. No name, no identification, just a set of coordinates on the station's lower ring, and a time. "That is a Drenari comm frequency," Laura said. Danny took the device and stared at the message. The Drenari, the big armored warrior species mercenaries who had been sitting in the wet nebula the whole time. The ones who had watched Silani get grabbed and had done absolutely nothing. Now they wanted to talk. Danny looked at Laura. Laura looked at Danny. "Could be a trap," she said. "Could be," he agreed. "We are going anyway, are we not?" Danny put the comm unit in his pocket and reached for his boots again. The lower ring of the Concord station was where the station stopped pretending to be civilized. The lights were dimmer down here, the corridors were narrower, and the air had the faint metallic taste of recyclers that had not been serviced in too long. This was where the docking crews lived, where the off-the-books cargo changed hands, and where people went when they did not want to be watched. Danny and Laura found the private docking lounge at the coordinates from the message. It was a small room attached to a cargo bay, with metal walls, a single overhead light, and the kind of furniture that looked like it had been bolted down to survive frequent arguments. 3 Drenari were waiting inside. Danny had seen Drenari before, but up close, they were something else entirely. They were big, not as tall as the KrolVek, but wider, denser, built like walls that had decided to get up and walk around. Their bodies were covered in natural bone plating that grew in overlapping ridges across their shoulders, arms, and backs. Their skin underneath was dark gray, tough as leather, and their faces were blunt and heavy with deep-set eyes that looked like they had seen things they would never talk about. The one in front was the oldest. His name was Hask, and he had more scars than Danny, which was saying something. The bone plating on his left shoulder was cracked and had healed unevenly, giving him a lopsided look. He stood with the stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to be dangerous, and an equal amount of time learning how to control it. The 2 behind him were younger. The first was Vorin, tall and quiet, with plating so dark it was almost black, and eyes that watched everything but revealed nothing. The second was Kelta, the youngest of the 3, and the only female. She was leaner than the others, faster looking, with sharp ridges along her forearms, and a restless energy that made her seem like she was always a half-second from moving. Hask did not offer a greeting. He did not smile. He looked at Danny, then at Laura, and then he spoke. "We watched the fight," he said. His voice was low, the kind of voice that came from a chest built like a barrel. "We were in the bar. We saw everything." Danny nodded. "I know. I saw you." "We did not help." "I noticed that too." A silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Hask held Danny's gaze without blinking. Then he said something that Danny did not expect. "I am ashamed." The word hung in the air. Laura glanced at Danny. Danny said nothing. He waited. Hask began to speak, and it was clear this was not easy for him. He explained that the Drenari had once been a warrior culture built on principles that went back thousands of years. They had codes of honor, traditions of protection, oaths that required them to stand between the weak and the strong, no matter the cost. Their ancestors had been defenders, guardians, beings who measured their worth not by how many enemies they had killed, but by how many innocents they had shielded. But that was a long time ago. Over the centuries, the Drenari had drifted. Mercenary work paid better than honor. Corporate contracts offered security and comfort. The galaxy rewarded efficiency, not nobility, and slowly, generation by generation, the old codes had been forgotten. The Drenari were still warriors, still feared, still respected for their fighting ability. But they fought for credits now, not for causes. They fought for whoever paid the most, and they had stopped asking whether the work was right. Hask said that sitting in that bar, watching a human, a species the entire galaxy openly mocked, stand up for a stranger, while 3 Drenari warriors did nothing, was the single most humiliating moment of his life. Not because Danny had won the fight. Hosk did not care about winning or losing. What broke something inside him was that Danny had fought the fight at all. That a being half his size, with no armor, no plating, no natural weapons, had done what Hosk and his team were supposed to do, and had been too comfortable, too cautious, too hollowed out to attempt. Danny shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. He was not good at this kind of thing. Compliments made him itchy. Being called brave made him want to leave the room. "Look," Danny said. "I am not a hero. I am a cargo hauler with a bad temper and worse judgment. She will tell you." Laura did not hesitate. "He has terrible judgment," she confirmed. "The worst I have ever seen." Hosk did not smile, but something in his expression shifted, a very small crack in the stone. "I do not care about your modesty, human," he said. "I care about what you did." He told Danny that the Drenary had a word for what had happened in that bar. The word was Karath Sol, and it translated roughly to standing in the gap. It described the act of placing yourself between someone helpless and someone harmful, regardless of the personal cost. It was one of the oldest concepts in Drenary warrior tradition, a cornerstone of their ancient codes, and it had not been practiced by a living Drenary in over 200 years. A human had done it instead. Hosk let that sit for a moment. Then he made his offer. He and his team wanted to join Danny. Not as hired muscle, not for pay, not as part of a contract. They wanted to fly with him, work with him, and fight beside him. Because watching that bar fight had reminded them of something they had lost, and they wanted to find it again. Danny stared at him. Then he looked at Laura. Laura raised one eyebrow, which was her way of saying, "This is your decision, but I am not going to stop you." Danny looked back at Hask. "The $50 is a cargo ship," he said. "It is old, it is slow, the heating system breaks every 3 weeks, and the pay is barely enough to keep fuel in the tank." "That is acceptable," Hask said. "We haul cargo, we do not fight wars." "And yet you fought one anyway," Hask replied. Danny opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not have an answer for that. Vorin, who had not spoken the entire time, stepped forward. He moved slowly, deliberately, and when he spoke, his voice was deep and careful. Like each word was something he had chosen after a long time thinking about it. "In the old language," he said, "a warrior who fights only for money is called Kareth Den, which means empty blade. A warrior who fights for those who cannot fight for themselves is called Kareth Vol, which means living shield." He looked at Danny. "We have been empty blades for too long." Kelta, the young one, had been quiet up until now, her sharp eyes moving between Danny and Laura with an expression that was hard to read. She finally spoke up. "I watched you headbutt a Krolvek," she said, "with your actual head. No armor, no plating, just your skull against his face." She paused. "That is either the bravest or the stupidest thing I have ever seen, and I would very much like to see what you do next." Danny rubbed the back of his head, where a bruise from that exact headbutt was still tender. "Mostly it was stupid," he admitted. "Good," Kelta said. "Stupid is interesting." Danny sighed. He looked at Laura one more time. She shrugged, which meant yes. "Fine," Danny said. "Welcome aboard. But if the heating breaks, Hask is fixing it. I am done crawling through that duct." Hask extended one massive hand. Danny took it. The Drenari's grip could have crushed stone, but he held it gently, and for just a moment, something old and important passed between them. Not a contract, not an obligation, but a choice, freely made, to stand together. While this was happening in the lower ring, the rest of the galaxy was paying attention. The footage from the Wet Nebula had reached the Galactic Federated Assembly. several delegations had quietly begun reassessing their official positions on humanity. The Velnoxi still considered humans irrational, but the word had taken on a new weight. The Valley Trade Council had formally submitted a request for increased human security presence along their most vulnerable shipping routes, which was the first time in galactic history that any species had specifically asked for human protection. And somewhere in the intelligence networks of at least 6 different species, a short, unsigned report was circulating. It contained no formal analysis, no strategic recommendations, no official stance, just a single observation, written by someone who had watched the footage very carefully and understood what it meant. The observation read, "Do not provoke the humans. They do not respond to intimidation the way other species do. They become more dangerous." That evening, Danny, Laura, Hask, Voren, and Kelta sat together at a table in the wet nebula. Paco served them personally, and he did not charge for the first round. The hole in his ceiling had been patched, though not well. Silani joined them, carrying a tray of drinks she had bought with her own credits. Her skin was glowing a warm gold, bright and steady, and when Laura asked what that color meant, Silani smiled and said it meant she was happy. 5 beings from 3 different species sat together and drank. Not because a treaty required it, not because politics demanded it, not because anyone was being paid. They sat together because they wanted to. And in a galaxy that ran on fear, profit, and self-interest, that might have been the most dangerous thing of all. 3 months changed everything, and nothing, all at the same time. Danny Cook had not set out to become a symbol. He had set out to haul cargo, get paid, and avoid dying in a way that would be embarrassing to explain. But the galaxy did not care about what Danny wanted. The galaxy had watched the footage from the wet nebula, and the galaxy had made up its own mind. The video had been viewed billions of times. It had been studied in military academies on 12 different worlds, debated in philosophy courses at the Velnoxi Institute of Higher Reason, and referenced in at least 4 separate diplomatic proceedings at the Galactic Federated Assembly. A human cultural researcher on Earth had written a paper about it called The Cook Incident and the Galactic Perception of Human Altruism, which Danny had never read and never intended to read. The $50, once a forgettable freighter that nobody noticed, was now one of the most recognized ships in the outer spiral. Not because it was fast or powerful or well-armed. It was none of those things. It was recognized because of who was on board. Danny still flew the ship. Laura still kept it running. And now Hask, Voren, and Kelta lived in the cargo bay, which they had converted into sleeping quarters, using spare plating, and a determination that Laura described as impressive but architecturally terrifying. In the 3 months since the bar fight, the crew of the $50 had taken on a series of jobs that nobody else wanted. They escorted refugee convoys through pirate-controlled space in the outer spiral, where small ships carrying families and children were easy targets for raiders who did not care about anything except cargo they could sell. They ran medical supplies to colonies that had been blockaded by corporate interests, slipping through patrol lines at night with their transponder dark, and Laura cursing quietly at the navigation console. They provided security for independent traders like Silani, merchants who could not afford the fees that the big private military companies charged, and who had been left to fend for themselves in a galaxy that valued profit over people. They were not soldiers. They were not sanctioned by any government or authorized by any military command. They were just 5 beings from 3 different species who had decided, independently and without ceremony, that somebody ought to do the right thing, and it might as well be them. The Kralvek cartels had put a bounty on Danny's head. The amount was significant, enough to buy a small ship outright, and it had attracted the attention of more than a few bounty hunters. Danny found this mildly flattering. Laura found it deeply irritating. Hask, considered it a compliment of the highest order, because among the Draenari, being hated by the right enemies was a sign of good character. Vorin, who remained the quietest member of the crew, had changed in small but noticeable ways. He spoke more often now, though still carefully. He had begun keeping a journal, actual written words on actual paper, which Danny had given him from a supply crate, because Vorin found the act of writing by hand calming. And he had started wearing a small patch on his chest armor, something Danny had shown him one evening while they were sitting in the cargo bay during a long jump between systems. The patch was simple, a circle with a line through it, stitched over the outline of a kneeling figure. It was an old Earth symbol that Danny had seen years ago, and the meaning was straightforward. Not on our watch. Vorin had asked what it meant, and when Danny explained it, the Draenari had sat very still for a long time. The next day, the patch was on his armor, and it had not come off since. Kelta had changed in different ways. She had developed what Laura called a concerning and what Danny called an alarming fascination with human culture. It had started small. She had asked Danny about human music, and he had made the mistake of playing her some old rock and blues from his personal collection. She had listened to the entire playlist 3 times in a row, her sharp ridged head bobbing slightly, and had declared that humans were the only species in the galaxy who made sounds that felt like fighting and crying at the same time. Then she discovered human food. Or more specifically, she discovered burritos. A trader on a station had been selling them from a small stall, and Kelta had eaten 4 in one sitting, and then spent the rest of the day talking about them. She had since attempted to recreate them using alien ingredients in the $50 small galley, with results that ranged from edible to genuinely hazardous. But her favorite human discovery was the concept of trash talk. Danny had explained it to her during a tense standoff with a pirate scout ship, when he had opened a comm channel and told the pirate captain in very colorful language exactly what he thought of him, his ship, and his career choices. She asked Danny to teach her, and he had agreed, mostly because he found it funny. She had taken to it with a natural talent that was, frankly, a little scary. During their most recent engagement with a raider, Kelta had opened a broadcast channel and delivered a string of insults so creative and so anatomically specific that the raider had actually paused mid-attack, apparently unsure how to respond. Laura had laughed so hard she had missed a navigation checkpoint. The Velnoxi, for their part, had revised their official assessment of humanity. The new document, authored by Counselor Dreth Vaughn after what his colleagues described as weeks of reluctant reflection, had replaced the original lecture entirely. It was longer, more careful, and far less dismissive. The key passage had been translated into 47 galactic languages, and was now one of the most widely quoted texts in modern diplomatic literature. It read, "Humans are, by any objective measure, irrational. They form emotional bonds with other species without regard for genetic or political advantage. They intervene in conflicts that offer them no benefit and considerable risk. They absorb physical damage that would incapacitate more biologically advanced beings, and continue functioning through chemical processes that can only be described as self-administered combat enhancement. They are loud, stubborn, sentimental, and dangerously unpredictable. They are also, it must be noted with some reluctance, extraordinarily difficult to kill, impossible to intimidate, and inexplicably kind. The galaxy would be wise not to underestimate them. More importantly, the galaxy would be wise not to give them a reason to fight, because they will, every time, and they will not stop." Danny had heard about the passage. Laura had read it to him while he was fixing a coolant leak under the main engine. He had listened, grunted, and said, "That is a lot of words to say we are stubborn." Laura had smiled. He also said we are kind. "That part is your fault," Danny had said. The passage had done something unexpected, though. Across the galaxy, in small and quiet ways, things were shifting. Other species were watching what the crew of the $50 was doing, and some of them were asking a question they had not asked before. Not why the humans were doing it, but why they themselves were not. A group of Valley merchants had formed a mutual protection cooperative, pooling their resources to hire escorts for their most vulnerable routes. A young Drenari soldier had resigned from a corporate security firm and joined a colony defense force on the frontier, citing personal reasons that everyone understood. Even a handful of Akari engineers, small, cautious beings who had never been known for bravery, had volunteered to maintain ships for refugee convoys, working for free because they had seen the footage and decided that fixing an engine was something they could do. None of it was dramatic. None of it made the news feeds. But it was happening, slowly and quietly, like water wearing away at stone. The story ends on a quiet evening aboard the $50. The ship was drifting in a calm stretch of space between systems, riding the silence of the void. The stars outside the cockpit windows were still and bright, scattered across the black like dust on dark cloth. Danny was in the pilot's seat, with his feet up on the console, reading an old paperback novel, an actual paper book, creased and dog-eared, held together with tape and stubbornness, much like Danny himself. Laura was asleep in her bunk, one arm hanging over the edge, snoring softly in a way she would deny if anyone mentioned it. Hosk was in the cargo bay, sitting cross-legged on the floor, maintaining his armor with slow, careful movements, and humming a Drenari war hymn that was older than most civilizations. Vorin was in his corner, meditating in silence, the patch on his armor catching the light every time the ship turned. Kelta was in the galley, attempting to make burritos with ingredients she had bought at the last station. The smell suggested she was getting closer to success, but not close enough. It was peaceful. It was ordinary. It was the kind of evening that did not feel important while it was happening, but that each of them would remember for a very long time. Then Danny's comm unit buzzed. He picked it up and looked at the screen. It was a message on an open distress frequency. No encryption, no identification, just raw and desperate. A small colony on the edge of contested space. Pirates had set up a blockade. Supply ships could not get through. There were families inside, children, people with no weapons and no way out. Danny read the message once. He read it again. Then he set his book down on the console, pages open, spine up, the way he always did when he expected to come back to it. He pressed the intercom button on the console. His voice was calm, steady, and carried through every room of the ship. "Crew, suit up. Someone needs help." From the bunk, Laura's voice came first, thick with sleep but already sharp. "On it." From the cargo bay, Hosk's deep rumble. "On it." From his corner, Vorin's quiet confirmation. "On it." From the galley, Kelta's voice, accompanied by the clatter of something falling off the counter. "On it." 5 voices, 3 species, 1 answer. Danny turned the $50 toward the coordinates, and the stars began to move. Somewhere in the vast, cold, and different galaxy, a small ship with a bad heating system and a crew of misfits was flying toward trouble. Not because they were ordered to, not because they were paid to, not because anyone would thank them or remember them, or write their names in any official record. They flew because a colony full of strangers needed help, and because somebody had to, because that was always the answer, was it not? Somebody had to. And 5 insane, irrational, impossible beings from 3 different worlds had decided together that it might as well be them. The $50 flew on, small and stubborn against the endless dark, heading toward the trouble, heading toward the people who needed them, heading toward whatever came next, with the only plan they had ever really needed. Show up. Stand in the gap. Do not stop. The galaxy could call them whatever it wanted. They had work to do. The Concorde station hung in the black like a spinning wheel of light, turning slowly against the endless dark of open space. It was the largest meeting point in the known galaxy, a place where dozens of alien species came to trade, argue, sign treaties, and pretend they liked each other. Ships of every shape and size docked along its outer rings, and inside its massive corridors, beings from 100 different worlds walked side by side under the glow of artificial sunlight. Humanity had only been part of this galactic community for 11 years. In the grand timeline of the Galactic Federated Assembly, that was nothing. Most species had been members for centuries, some for thousands of years. Humans were new, and most of the galaxy treated them the way older kids treated the small one who just showed up at the playground, with amusement, mild pity, and a general agreement that they probably would not last long. Danny Cook did not care about any of that. He cared about getting paid. He walked through the lower corridors of the Concorde station with his hands in his jacket pockets and a look on his face that said he had not slept enough and had not eaten recently. He was 36 years old, built like a man who had spent his younger years carrying heavy things in bad places, and he had a scar along his jawline from a drop mission on a contested moon that he did not like to talk about. He had served 8 years in the Marines before deciding that being shot at for a government paycheck was less appealing than being shot at for his own paycheck. So he had bought a beat-up freighter, named it the $50, and started hauling cargo across the outer systems. Walking beside him, matching his pace with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this for years, was Laura Beckett. Laura was his co-pilot, his business partner, and the only person in the galaxy he trusted completely. She was 33, sharp-eyed, quick with her hands, and had a talent for fixing engines and breaking noses in roughly equal measure. She had grown up on a mining colony in the belt, which meant she had learned to fight before she had learned to read, and she considered both skills equally important. They were on their way to the cargo office to finalize a delivery contract, but the route took them past the station's grand forum, a wide-open hall with curved walls and tiered seating, where the important species held their important lectures about important things. Today, the Velnoxi were presenting. The Velnoxi were tall, crystalline beings who looked like someone had carved people out of pale blue quartz. They were beautiful in the way that ice sculptures were beautiful, cold, precise, and not something you wanted to touch. They prided themselves on logic, emotional control, and intellectual superiority, and they had a long tradition of studying other species the way a scientist might study bacteria under glass. Their lead ambassador, a figure named Counselor Dreth Vaughn, was standing at the center of the forum, delivering a lecture. His voice, translated through the station's systems into common galactic standard, carried out into the corridor where Danny and Laura were walking. The lecture was titled Emotional Primitivism and the Human Anomaly, and Dreth Vaughn was listing, with obvious enjoyment, all the reasons humans were considered insane by galactic standards. Danny slowed his walk as the words drifted through the open archway. Dreth Vaughn was explaining that humans willingly consumed capsaicin, a chemical defense produced by plants to prevent being eaten, and that they not only tolerated it, but actively sought out the most potent versions and put it on their food for pleasure. The audience murmured with disbelief. He went on. Humans bonded emotionally with predatory animals and kept them inside their homes. They had invented weapons capable of splitting atoms and destroying entire cities. And then they had continued living on the same planet where they tested those weapons, sometimes within a few hundred miles of the blast sites. They launched themselves into space by strapping their bodies to tubes filled with controlled explosions. Their most popular forms of entertainment involved simulated combat, high-speed collisions, and voluntary brain injuries, which they called sports. The alien audience laughed. Some of them shook their heads. A few looked genuinely frightened. Dreth Vaughn continued. He described a human emotion called spite, which he explained as the willingness to endure personal suffering for no other reason than to deny satisfaction to an enemy. He described the human adrenal system, which flooded the body with chemicals during moments of fear or anger, temporarily increasing strength, speed, and pain resistance. He called it a biological combat drug that activated automatically. He concluded by saying that humans were, without question, the most irrational species the galaxy had ever encountered, and that their continued survival was less a testament to their intelligence and more a testament to the universe's sense of humor. The audience applauded politely. Laura, who had stopped beside Danny to listen, rolled her eyes so hard it looked painful. "Lovely," she said. "Real flattering." Danny shrugged. "He's not wrong, though." They kept walking, leaving the forum behind, and made their way down to the entertainment level of the station, where the bars, restaurants, and gambling halls lived. Their destination was a place called the Wet Nebula, the most popular multi-species bar on the Concord station. It was run by a four-armed Grellian named Paco, a wide, tough, frog-like creature who kept the peace with a combination of strong drinks and a plasma shotgun mounted behind the counter. The Wet Nebula was considered neutral ground. No species pulled rank inside. Everyone was equal under Paco's roof, and anyone who disagreed got to meet the shotgun. Danny and Laura grabbed a corner booth near the back wall, where they could see the whole room. Old habit. Laura called it paranoia. Danny called it staying alive. The bar was full. Hulking Drenari mercenaries with natural bone plating covering their bodies sat at a long table, drinking something thick and dark. Slender Veli traders with glowing pale skin moved through the crowd like ghosts made of moonlight. A cluster of Ikari engineers, small furry creatures no bigger than house cats, chattered on a raised platform built for their size. A few Velnoxy officers sat in a separate section, drinking mineral water and looking at everyone else like they were studying zoo animals. Danny ordered a drink called a Black Sun, which was the closest thing the station offered to whiskey. Laura ordered the same. They touched glasses and drank. "Another job," Danny said. "Another paycheck," Laura said. "Another day alive. Do not jinx it." Danny smiled, but the smile faded quickly. The front door of the bar had just opened, and 5 figures walked in that made the room feel smaller. They were Krolvek, massive, 6-limbed reptilian creatures with thick-scaled hides, heavy jaws, and eyes like black stones. They were known across the galaxy as enforcers, debt collectors, and the kind of beings you hired when you wanted someone to be very afraid. The one in front was the biggest, scarred across his face and chest, and he moved with the slow confidence of something that had never been challenged by anything it could not crush. Paco noticed them from behind the counter. His 4 hands slowed their work. His wide eyes tracked the group as they moved deeper into the bar. Danny noticed them too. He did not say anything, but his posture changed. A small shift, barely visible, the kind of thing only someone who knew him well would catch. Laura caught it. She always did. Without a word, she moved her jacket to one side, revealing the sidearm holstered on her hip. The Krolvek spread out across the bar, their heavy footsteps shaking the glasses on nearby tables. They were loud, they were drunk, and they were looking at the room like they owned it. Danny took another sip of his drink and said nothing, but he did not take his eyes off them. The night was just getting started.